Hi, I'm Dr. Bernard Starr with a report on how the invention of Christian Jesus by Renaissance art, Hollywood films, and art historians and critics proved lethal for Jews. Is it possible that revered Renaissance artworks and celebrated blockbuster Hollywood films played a major part in promoting antisemitism? And if so, why did art professionals, historians, critics, and curators support that prejudice which was responsible for violence against Jews? You will be shocked to learn how a powerful foundation of historical antisemitism embedded in Renaissance artworks has escaped exposure for centuries. When Dara Horn, author of People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted Present, told her children about the murder of Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, they explained it with 5 words: because some people hate Jews. This answer begs the question, why? In the film Resistance, the character who plays the French Jewish resistance fighter Marcel Marceau provides his answer. Because for centuries they were told, "We killed Jesus." No doubt that's a major factor, but to make the Christ killers' charge justify violence and genocide, another falsification of biblical history had to be added. Jesus had to be Christian, but Christianity did not exist in Jesus' lifetime. Why was the conversion of Jesus to a Christian critical for justifying hatred of Jews? Consider that the Sanhedrin, the ruling body over Jewish affairs, charged and condemned Jesus for committing blasphemies against Judaism, violating Jewish dietary laws by eating unclean food, Mark 7:1-23, violating the Sabbath work prohibition by healing and his disciples picking and eating grain on that sacred day, Mark 2:27-28, and the most serious charge that he declared himself the Jewish Messiah. But these charges were not likely to later incite Christians when Christianity was established and sought to separate from Judaism. When the charge changed to the Jews killed the Christian Jesus, Christian Messiah and Savior King, the crime became the launching pad for rage, hatred, and unrestrained violence against Jews. The invention of the Christian Jesus thus emerged as one of the most deadly lies in history. Make no mistake about it, converting Jesus into a Christian was not a trivial matter. It weaponized the Christ killer's charge. The accusation that Jews collectively killed the Christian Jesus has had lethal consequences for Jews through the centuries and into the present day, as detailed by Jeremy Cohn in his scholarly book, Christ Killers. Renaissance artworks contributed in a major way to the creation and perpetuation of the Christian Jesus. Hundreds of years later, Hollywood films reinforced the deception. Surprisingly, art historians, curators, and critics sustained the fraud and continue to do so by failing to acknowledge the identity theft of taking the Jew out of Jesus and thus falsifying biblical history, a falsification that fostered antisemitism. You will not find any mention of this glaring fabrication and identity theft in exhibits or commentaries of Renaissance religious paintings. In reviewing Christ in a Landscape by 16th century Dutch artist Jan Svart van Groningen, ArtPlusHistory.com notes, Van Groningen's portrayal of richly colored landscapes in carefully rendered detail, revealing influence of both the Italian Renaissance and the Antwerp style. Adding to the beauty of the painting, the review adds, Christ is draped in billowing contemporary garments. A golden robe covered with a royal purple sash, indicative of his status as King of the Heavens. praise for this magnificent artistic creation is well deserved. But what the commentary does not disclose is that the prominent theme expresses fraud, an omission that is replaced by a false inclusion. Jesus was a Jewish preacher and religious leader who lived and died a dedicated, practicing Jew, according to a consensus of Christian and Jewish biblical scholars. So why is he displaying a cross staff? Why is he broadcasting the false message that he is a Christian, a religion that did not exist in word or concept in his lifetime? If Jesus were to view this painting, he would likely see it as mockery or a bad joke. Why? The image of Jesus holding a cross is absurd. For Jesus and other Jews under Roman rule, the cross was a symbol of persecution, torture, and murder of thousands of Jews who resisted Roman oppression. Furthermore, the cross as a devotional Christian object would not take root for another 300 years from the time represented in this painting. If this distortion were a rare incident, it could easily be dismissed. But it's not. The fraud is repeated in a vast trove of Renaissance religious artworks and never noted or exposed by art professionals. Similar fraud is featured in the numerous paintings of the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist. In the Gospel's account, John baptized Jews and only Jews in preparation for the expected arrival of the Jewish Messiah. Matthew 3:13-17, Mark 1:9-11, Luke 3:21-22. Baptism was an ancient Jewish practice of spiritual cleansing. But you wouldn't know this from the Renaissance paintings that transformed baptism into a Christian event, despite Christianity not existing at the time. In Andrea Verrocchio's painting, circa 1472, the prominent display of the cross staff transforms the event into a Christian baptism. I think John and Jesus would react to this painting the same way I imagine Jesus reacting to Van Groningen's painting. It may be hard to imagine Renaissance artworks more outrageous in their distortions and fabrication of biblical history. But in fact, paintings of the betrothal or marriage of the pregnant 13-year-old Jewish girl Mary to Jewish carpenter Joseph in a rural village in Galilee do exactly that. By the magic of the paintbrush, Renaissance artists pictured the event as a Christian ceremony. The betrothal or marriage is officiated by a Christian priest in lavish Renaissance-era church attire, and it takes place in palatial surroundings that couldn't be further from their real-life settings. The painting of the betrothal by famed Renaissance painter Raphael, 1504, served as a model for similar paintings by almost every major Renaissance artist. If Mary's betrothal was a Christian event in the minds of Christians, there was every reason to continue the farce by falsifying biblical history in the profusion of Madonna and child artworks. And indeed, these typically show Mary and Jesus as light-haired, fair-skinned Northern Europeans in Christian settings with Christian saints and artifacts. Often Mary holds the obviously uncircumcised infant Jesus. One must ask, what happened to he was circumcised on the 8th day, Luke 2:21. Furthermore, the 13 mentions of Mary in the New Testament, 12 in the Gospels, and 1 in Acts of Apostles before she disappears from the Bible, are steeped in Judaism. Try to find even a hint of Mary's Semitic Jewish identity, and you will find yourself on a fruitless hunt. The painting of Madonna and Child enthroned with Saints Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist, circa 1523, by Renaissance artist Giuliano Again, John the Baptist is holding a cross staff. He points to Mary and infant Jesus to ensure that the viewer gets the news that these Jews are also members of the non-existent Christianity. In truth, they were practicing Jews who resided in a rural Jewish setting far removed from the one pictured here. Most Christians and Jews accept that Jesus was born Jewish, but query them further and you will find they mean he used to be Jewish, that sometime after childhood he rejected Judaism, preached a new faith, and became a Christian. Some Renaissance patrons who commissioned paintings were so eager to convert Jesus to Christianity they couldn't wait for used to, and made him a Christian at birth. In the celebrated iconic painting, The Rest on the Flight into Egypt, by prolific Renaissance painter Fra Bartolomeo, Jesus' family is fleeing to Egypt right after his birth. They are escaping the edict of King Herod to kill all male children under age 2 after learning that the King of the Jews had been born, Matthew 2:16. In opposition to the gospel account, the recently born Jesus is displaying a cross, telling the viewer that this Jewish family is Christian. Why should we care about these blatant falsifications of Jesus' life? Why does it matter that he is wrongly transformed into a Christian? The early church struggled to separate from Judaism. In fact, after the crucifixion, the believers in Jesus the Messiah were led by his disciples as a Jewish sect. Proving that they continued to identify as Jews, believers under the leadership of Jesus' brother James continued to meet and worship in the temple in Jerusalem. Had they declared a new religion, they would face death if they dared to even enter the temple. A sign read, quote, "No alien may enter within the balustrade around the sanctuary and the enclosure. Whoever is caught on himself shall be put blame for the death which will ensue." Later, when others sought to establish a separate religion called Christianity, many converts did not see the distinction between the two. They continued to attend synagogues and celebrate Jewish holidays. This is when the church, determined to effect a final split, stepped up its campaign of demonizing Jews. The charge of Christ killers successfully aroused hatred for Jews. That hatred was intensified by the profusion of Renaissance artworks that relentlessly depicted Jesus and his family as Christian. The proliferation of crucifixion scenes displayed in churches and other public spaces was a constant reminder of the suffering of Jesus, the Christian, caused by the Christ killer Jews. Antisemitism by commission, acts of prejudice, violence, and genocide, is easily recognized. The more subtle antisemitism by omission can be just as lethal in its consequences, but it's camouflaged by the absence of direct violence. This enabled it to slip under the radar for centuries into modern times. That's why Renaissance religious artworks may be one of the most powerful yet unrecognized historical forces that fueled anti-Semitism. Patrons who commissioned the artworks and the artists who executed them strived to Christianize their creations as much as possible to impress church leaders and others with their piety and devotion to Jesus and Christianity. And artists would gain more patrons and commissions if their works were widely praised. Just as patrons and artists were eager to abandon the Jewish Jesus for an invented Christian story, 20th century filmmakers did the same. Noting the popularity of Bible stories, filmmakers found profit in playing to Christian America, which back then constituted 90% of the U.S. population. To entice Christians to step up to the box office, they gave them what they wanted to see and hear. inspiring stories about Jesus and Christianity. Renaissance patrons and artists may have sought favor to gain a ticket to heaven. Filmmakers were hoping that success would deliver other kinds of riches, perhaps a home in Beverly Hills and a beach house in Malibu. Unfortunately, they were unaware that they were reinforcing identity theft and a falsification of biblical history that proved lethal for Jews. In the 1953 blockbuster film The Robe, several of the characters convert to Christianity. But Christianity did not exist at the time, and wouldn't for more than a decade after the crucifixion. In the popular film Salome, released in the same year, the Jewish and Roman authorities refer to the dangerous nuisances John the Baptist and Jesus, who are, quote, preaching a new faith, end quote, with the implication that the new faith was Christianity. Later, the Roman soldier Claudius, Salome's lover, converts to Christianity. The Jewish princess Salome joins Claudius and also converts to non-existent Christianity. The stars of these films, some of the most famous and beloved actors and actresses, Richard Burton, Rita Hayworth, Charles Lawton, and more, rendered the falsifications of biblical history ever more believable in the minds of the public. Another blockbuster film, The Greatest Story Ever Told, was the most expensive film ever produced at the time it was released in 1965. The film included a cast of more than 35 leading Hollywood stars, some making only cameo appearances. It was nominated for 5 Academy Awards. One major flaw was not noted in reviews or commentaries. Viewers would not know that Jesus, his followers, and those attending his sermons were Jews. They didn't dress like Jews, and none appeared with prayer shawls or any clear clues of Jewish identities. Surprisingly, the word Jew is never heard in the film, despite the fact that it appears 82 times in the Gospels, which chronicles Jesus' 3-year spiritual mission up until his crucifixion. Of course, the word Christian does not appear in the Gospels for the very reason that Christianity did not exist during Jesus' lifetime. At the beginning of The Greatest Story Ever Told, Jesus is called Rabbi once, but that title and the word Jew are not mentioned during the remaining 3 hours of the film. In a scene that shows Jesus performing a miraculous healing, supposedly in a synagogue, the house of worship does not look like a synagogue, and the characters do not resemble Jews taking part in a religious service. Nor do we ever see Jesus participating in a traditional Jewish prayer service. Yet the Gospel of Luke 4:16 reports that Jesus regularly prayed and read from the Torah in a synagogue on the Jewish Sabbath. It appears that the writers and director George Stevens deliberately eliminated, minimalized, or masked Jewish content to play to a Christian audience. In doing so, the film sent the same false message as Renaissance artworks, the invented story of Jesus, his apostles, and other followers defecting from Judaism and participating in a new faith with Jesus at the helm. And the deception continues. In a British film stage production of Jesus Christ Superstar, streamed on Broadway HD in 2020, the camera zooms in on Mary Magdalene expressing her love for Jesus. During her gripping, passionate aria, a large cross tattooed on her upper left arm dominates the screen. This ensures that the audience receives the false message that she and Jesus are Christians, which of course they are not. In another streamed British production of Jesus Christ Superstar in April 2022, Mary Magdalene sings her aria wearing a jacket. Near the end of the aria, she removes the jacket, revealing a large cross tattoo on her arm, again assuring the audience that she is a Christian. In truth, though, audiences don't need reminders. Indeed, centuries of identity theft in artworks and teachings have led to the almost universal, false assumption that although Jesus was born Jewish, he rejected Judaism and launched Christianity. Would it have made a difference historically if it were fully understood that Jesus, his disciples, and followers remained dedicated practicing Jews throughout Jesus' ministry and lifetime? Would the charge of Christ killers have lost some of its power to incite violence? Carmelite nun Maria Theresa thinks so. She, along with other nuns, lived in a convent established at the Dachau concentration camp in Germany as a spiritual practice of prayer, remembrance, and hope. In the book, I Sleep in Hitler's Room, Sister Teresa conjectured to the author Tuvia Tenenbaum, quote, "Because the Mother of God was a Jew, because Jesus was a Jew, and all the apostles were Jews, and if we remembered that, in those days, the Holocaust would not have happened," end quote. That only could have been effective if the perpetrators understood that killing Jews was equivalent to killing Jesus. We can grasp why Renaissance artists and their patrons, as well as modern-day filmmakers, Christianized the Jewish life of Jesus. But why have art world professionals, historians, critics, and curators participated in the deception? A puzzling question exacerbated by the volume of glaring deception spanning centuries. Is it possible that their over-romanticizing of the Renaissance blinded them to the deadly consequences of reinforcing a lie that weaponized anti-Semitism? Do they fear that Renaissance art would be condemned if the truth were known? Might they also be reluctant to criticize artworks that contributed to the Renaissance, which ended the Dark Ages by setting Western civilization on a path toward humanism and enlightenment? If so, they tragically fail to recognize that darkness not only continued for Jews, it intensified. Jews were herded into ghettos and were subjected to mass expulsions, forced conversions, violence, and genocidal acts, all driven by hatred for killing the invented Christian Jesus. Whatever the reasons, it's time to stop the lie and make amends by telling the truth. Wake up! The emperor is naked! And telling the truth doesn't mandate hiding or destroying artworks that are important contributions to Western culture and the development of art. Better yet, telling the truth can contribute to a greater understanding of historic anti-Semitism that was deeply embedded in Christian society. And truth can advance the reconciliation and healing process of two faiths that share a common foundation, a connection best expressed by the bold pronouncement of Pope Francis, quote, "Inside every Christian is a Jew." Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Bernard Starr.